Cabinet today. Welcome to anybody who may be watching. For regularity, I'll ask colleagues to introduce themselves. I'm Peter Fox, Leader of the Council.
Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Richard John, Cabinet Member for Children and Young People.
Sarah Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Development.
Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader, Responsibility for Enterprise.
Paul Jordan, Cabinet Member for Governance.
Penny Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Services, Safeguarding and Health.
Dimitri Petrini, Cabinet Member for Nothing, Leader of the Labour Group.
And we have, thank you for that. Apologies for absence. Apologies from Councillor Brian Jones, who's currently in New Zealand, having a hard-earned rest. Okay, we haven't got any apologies from Simon, I don't believe, have we? No, okay, nor Linda. Okay, so we'll move on to item 2. Any declarations of interest? This is pertinent to any member in the room. If you find one, obviously, because there's so much stuff on the agenda today from in the budget, and if you feel you've got one, please declare it verbally and then fill in the pro forma. That goes for visited members as well. Can I welcome you both today, and welcome all of our officers and officers. Could you perhaps introduce yourself if you are asked to contribute during the course of events? Okay, I'm going to go straight on then to item 3 and little 1, and that is the volunteering policy. Councillor Phil Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And the purpose of this report is to provide a volunteering policy applicable to all service and business areas, including schools. And the recommendation is that it goes out particularly to governing bodies for adoption as soon as possible. It describes the role of volunteers in service delivery, sets out the terms governing their engagement and their ongoing relationship with the council, acknowledging the significant role that volunteers play in supporting service delivery. The policy applies to all volunteers engaged in supporting the delivery of council services, and includes services delivered by agents of the council, including contractors and schools, but it does not apply to volunteers who are active within communities and not managed by the council services, work experience, apprenticeship, student placements, or council employees volunteering for other groups and organisations. It is to be encouraged that other organisations who are associated with MCC projects but not controlled by MCC may like to adopt this policy as well, but we don't wish to be draconian here. We recognise that these various societies and groups are have got their own regulations, but it would be nice if we all operated on the same basis. The understanding is that our governance and safeguarding arrangements for the volunteering workforce needs to be enabling, proportionate, simple to administer, so that we can keep our volunteers and our organisations safe while supporting individuals who hold statutory accountabilities in this area. We've got a very comprehensive report here, and Owen Wills is here to answer any questions that members might have. It's been through the Strong Community Select Committee, it's been to JAG, and the unions were quite comfortable with it. We broadcast it to staff at People Board, it's been through SLT, and the other consultees are the head teachers and the audit committee. So this one's done the rounds. It's very comprehensive, and invite questions, Leader.
Thank you, Phil, and welcome, Owen. And first, perhaps, but can I just pay tribute to the work that the volunteers do in our county. I mean, fantastic. And Owen, congratulations on the work that you've been doing on driving that agenda forward. Some fantastic examples. It was a pleasure to join the Volunteer Awards recently in Caldecott. So many fantastic people giving so much of their own time for such good causes, and I was really proud to be part of that. So it's absolutely appropriate. We have a really strong, robust volunteering policy, and clearly we've got one. So I thank everybody who's been involved, and I'm sure you're one of the key architects in bringing the volunteering policy forward. So very supportive of what we've got in here, and the very thorough way that you've identified all the key areas. Obviously, the one in all of our minds will be safeguarding, and I'm sure others might want to recognise that as well. So, colleagues, I'll throw it open. Anybody want to?
Well, I was going to say something, but you just said it all. So,
right. Oh, sorry.
Shut up.
Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, and it just echoes really. I mean, again, thanks to Owen and to all the work of the volunteers, obviously absolutely critical, and a key component as well of the new community partnership development team, which obviously Owen's part of. So this is really key policy. I think it's really proportionate, so it's reflective of what we need to achieve through it. So the only one suggestion I've got is that we make sure that we reflect, and I appreciate the comments from Phil that this went to all the different committees, but if we could reflect that in reports going forward so that we can see what the comments were from the different committees, so like strong communities. I know this report went there.
Yeah.
Just to have that, even if they unanimously agreed that it was a good thing.
Was the feedback strong from the select committee?
Yeah, lots of comments. You know, some members were involved in those select committees. Lots of discussion around the role and the value that volunteers bring, and also the proportionality of this policy. That's something that Councillor Jones has just talked about. We're keen to ensure, this is about us turning residents into citizens, into active citizens. So we certainly don't want to hold that up in any way, shape or form with bureaucracy yet. We need to ensure things are safe and enabling. So that's really key to this policy. We've been on a journey, as you've alluded to. We've learned lots from that, and our learning is reflected in the policy.
Could I just make some? From the safeguarding point of view, I think a positive step forward is the volunteer database, which is should be in place in the new year, because a new member of staff has been taken on to collate all the information. So this database is in development, but it will be up and running. And I think that's an absolute vital part of safeguarding.
Owen, is there anything you wanted to talk us through on the policy there, which perhaps didn't get covered in any of the preamble, or anything you want to draw our attention to? I mean, it's thorough, it's comprehensive, it seems to cover all the bases I think of, but you've got an opportunity.
I think Councillor Murphy, has explained and delivered the report in a comprehensive fashion. What we have done is been very clear in the report around the accountability of managers in volunteer involvement in departments. So we're clear on what the manager's role is, and also then that of volunteer coordinators. So across our organisation, we bring together those volunteer coordinators or staff that support volunteers on a quarterly basis. So we've got consistency, we've got some support, we link people together, and we also bring in experts. Some of those experts are from the third sector, understanding that we're lucky to have that support from the likes of the National Trust and, people services colleagues that come in and deliver a very clear message around DBS as an example. So the policy is just part of what we feel is a robust framework. We train our staff. So leading volunteers, you will see through the policies, become mandatory. We want them to have the skills, the knowledge and the behaviours to carry out what our ambition is a very person-centred volunteering approach. And I think that's the only additional points I'd like to make, really.
Well, thanks, Owen. Colleagues, anybody else indeed? No?
Yeah, the only point I'd make is that we're clearly very pleased with the report, but the format of the report actually doesn't comply with the template. And if the matter has gone to scrutiny, we should say it has gone to scrutiny, and the conclusions and recommendations of scrutiny should be reflected in the report.
And that's not. I don't think that's
It's not a criticism.
It's not a common criticism of you, and I think that it's
Just
something that we need to make sure is in place for all of our reports. If there's a contribution that our select committees have made, which is pertinent for our consideration, we need them logged in there. But okay, well, on that basis, I'm going to thank you again, Owen, for the work you're doing with our volunteers, and some great things happening. I know there's great plans for us to do more and more. Volunteers are going to underpin so much of our service delivery going forward, really, and help us deliver in so many ways. And we're blessed with so many people in the county who do want to get involved. So we're thankful for that. So thanks for your work on this. Thanks for the policy. So the recommendations are that the volunteering policy be accepted and circulated to all service business areas and commended to governing bodies for adoption as soon as possible. Are we all in favour of that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Owen. Appreciate that. Okay, let's move on and to the next report, and that is the Reviewable Authority fees and charges. This will be the Phil Murphy show today, folks. So, Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for that too a few times. Yes, the review of the authority's fees and charges, an annual report. Vital that it comes out at this part of the game because the anticipated increases are factored into the budget. And we did have a problem last year, I recall, where people didn't realise that in accepting this report, they were effectively making ongoing decisions with regard to the budget setting process. So this is embedded within the budget. And it identifies the proposals for amending charges with effect from April 18, and of course that's only the charges that we have control over. An awful lot are externally set, and some of them, although we could increase them, we've taken a positive decision not to, where commercial considerations apply, and that sort of thing would be particularly important for leisure centres and places like that, who would look at their customer base and decide whether or not an increase was appropriate. So the charges take effect at a date no later than the 1st of April 18. Any pressures resulting from increases taking place after this date will need to be managed by chief officers within their respective directorate budget allocations. We want to move straight to item 3.12 at this stage, so just let me get to it a sec. It was hoped to gather fees and charges information from around Wales to allow members a better understanding of what flexibility they'd have to raise charges while still not being an outrider. Excuse me. Unfortunately, the presumption that every council prepared a similar comprehensive report to ours turned out to be not right. With Monmouthshire still rather unusual in trying to provide a comprehensive schedule for approval in one report. So nevertheless, an indication of 17-18 charges is provided based on a common comparator semi-rural authority. And this has indicated that our comprehensive fees and charges schedule is not quite as comprehensive as we presumed. So what we'll be doing over the next 12 months is benchmarking as much as we can, not just to make sure that we're relying with everybody else, but to make sure that we've taken advantage of things that perhaps we're not doing, but other authorities have done. Consequently, from a medium-term financial planning perspective, there's a planning assumption to only raise charges in accordance with inflation, and so we put 2.5% on during that process. This means, however, that unless there's a beneficial change in how many people use the service or reduction in running costs, the authority will derive little financial benefit or headroom from setting a charge in line with inflation. I read that directly from the report because I think it's I think it's essential that people understand that. Leader, there's a substantial report here with lots and lots of figures and lots of rationale. I'm quite certain that members will revisit this in the scrutiny of the budget. If anybody's got any questions, I'm sure they can relate them to the appropriate head of service.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Thanks for the work that's gone on here. There's a lot of information, background information, and obviously all of the schedule below. I don't know if anybody wants to draw through that. This will go out. This goes out for consultation, as you said. Same with the rest of the budget information. So no doubt the various fees and charges will be picked over in those select committees. Something we need to do, and indeed we've done every year, as I can remember, that we have to amend these. So, colleagues, anybody wish to add anything? Phil said.
Yep.
No. Okay.
Mark wants to add.
Mark, is there anything you wish to add?
Excuse me. It's
Yeah, please.
It's not commonplace for the fees and charges report to go via the selects for scrutiny. That's normally the revenue and capital budget proposals.
Yeah.
If you want, I will add it to that list. But normally speaking, this is the opportunity for.
Okay. Well, in that regard, then there is no need. Then if this is the process we usually adopt, and I couldn't remember, is for us to approve it here, then I believe that's where it should be approved. Okay.
I think if I could just put in there that as I said at the start of the introduction, there was a lot of confusion about that last year in the scrutiny session. So if that information was available, at least for people to comment on. I don't take anything away from the procedure now, but as I said, I don't repeat myself. There was a lot of confusion last time.
So decision will be made here, but obviously it could be discussed in the.
That's quite clear to me. I mean, otherwise, if you put it selected in a fashion of it being a discursive document, you would normally receive a subsequent report back to confirm them. But what we normally do is use this as an opportunity and explain that to members subsequently. Yeah. I mean, it goes on notice for people to actually have a view on the decisions anyway, doesn't it? So.
No, thank you for clarifying that, Mark. Okay, so we'll take that advice. So on that basis, I'll take us through the recommendations as we have. Yeah, sorry, Dimitri, was your questions are in the next report? Yeah. Okay, so so recommendation 2.1 that the proposed fees and charges for 18-19 identified for each type of chargeable service made are outlined in Appendix 1 and that they be adopted, and that the increase in charges takes effect at a date no later than 1st of April 18, with any pressures resulting from increases taking place after this date to be managed by chief officers. And 2.3, that chief officers effectively manage the budget pressures highlighted by services, not increasing charges in line with the 2.5% increase assumed in the 18 to 22 medium-term financial plan. Consideration should also be given to the cost effectiveness of and administration costs that result from implementing small increases to existing charges. Okay, so those are recommendations, 3 of them. All in favour of those? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for that. Mark, yes, Mark, you best stay there.
You're told to stay here, which is ominous.
More chairs around the table in a minute. Okay, so right, that's dealt with that one. We'll move on to 3C, then the substantive report probably of the day, and that is the medium-term financial plan 18-19 to 2021-22 and draft budget proposals, which we will be moving out for consultation. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And yes, it will be the Phil and Mark show here, I think. I want to start off by actually reading out the purposes of the report, because they set the scene particularly well. So we're highlighting the context within which the medium-term financial plan will be developed through to 21-22. We need to agree the assumptions to be used to update the MTFP and provide an early indication of the level of budget savings still to be found. In that, updating members with the implications arising out of the provisional settlement announcement of Welsh Government, and to consider the budget within the context of all of that, particularly with regards to the emergent corporate plan. And then, of course, to provide detailed draft proposals on the budget savings required to meet the gap between available resources and the need to spend in 18-19. And as you said, Leader, that's going out to consultation, and included in this report are the dates of the various scrutiny meetings. And I would urge as many people as possible to attend those meetings. And I would like to make it very clear, as I've done in previous years, that whereas I recognise that the council tax setting meeting is the one where everybody likes to come and tell us all about what we've got wrong about the budget, if anybody has any proposal that they wish us to consider with regards to incorporating in the final budget proposals, we will need to have that by the 31st of January so that the necessary evaluation and compliance tests can take place. So members will know that we have faced and will continue to face significant financial challenges. Over the last 4 years, the council has had to manage 19.1 million of savings from its service budgets, and whilst additionally also taking advantage of the cash flow savings, revising its capital finance arrangement of around 3.3 million. That was the MRP discussions that we had over the last 2 years. Funding from Welsh Government has reduced over the period, and austerity looks set to continue for the foreseeable future, although we don't know what's going to happen to the 1.2 million that the Chancellor billion that the Chancellor has just announced, but we'll no doubt get some clarity over that. At the same time, pressures on the budget have been increasing in terms of demographic growth, demand and expectation in children's services, contract price inflation, redundancy costs, etc. An ongoing forecast resource gap is being predicted. However, with the absence of future years indicative settlements from Welsh Government, planning for the future is challenging. We do have some sort of indication as to the next year, but nothing much beyond that. Not like the old days when we used to get 3 years indicative settlements, so we just don't get them anymore. The Future Monmouthshire Work Programme recognises that the challenges faced are not limited to financial pressures, but with other significant challenges. The year-end position for 16-17 and the current year-end monitoring continues to demonstrate the tightening of our financial position. Taking significant levels of resource out of the budget year on year has been a massive achievement. In reviewing this process, questions have been raised about whether it is sustainable going forward. Therefore, a one-year approach has been taken, albeit within the context of the MTFP, whilst the corporate plan, including a more medium-term approach, can be adopted next year. We have looked at the various inflation indicators. They're all set out in 3.11, which explains how we've come to the budget build, which is in the bulk of the report, which I'll leave for the scrutiny committees to dive into. But I would say that with regard to the council tax, we have modelled the 3.95% increase per annum throughout the medium-term financial plan, and I can say here today that we are minded, as a result of the unlikely uplift in settlements or further supports such as help for rural areas, to recommend to council that an increase of 4.95% is used for modelling, and this will be incorporated in the reports going to scrutiny for consultation so that members can be well aware of the implications of that increase. We will also not continue with the proposals to charge for the childcare element of breakfast clubs in schools. However, we will work on being able to identify the people who would be impacted, and we'll look at it again in the light of that information in subsequent budget rounds. We will not also continue with the proposal to introduce charges for disabled drivers, as the blue badge holders and car parking. And we will continue to prioritise schools and maintain funding at last year's level, but will not pass on any additional cost. Schools have done well to increase standards despite the financial constraints, and we cannot let that slip. It is assumed that additional reliance on reserves, except for one-off investment, that has a net ongoing benefit to the revenue budget, will be avoided in the medium-term financial plan. Capital financing costs are currently based on the approved capital MTFP. The funding budgets will need to be reviewed following the development of the next capital MTFP, taking account of any slippage, review of capital receipts position, and further approvals of schemes. And more about that when we come to the next report. Other corporate costs, such as precepts and levies, will also be updated as information becomes available. So, Leader, we have a very substantial report for front of us. It is going to scrutiny committees. Mark and his colleagues have looked at the report and made it scrutiny committee friendly, if you like, and that we've tried to focus on the business of each committee, so that hopefully they don't get too lost in everything else. So I'm quite they're quite free to ask whatever questions they like, but you know, let's try and keep it to the areas that they look at. So that's the introduction, Leader. I look forward to questions at the scrutiny committee.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Can I thank officers again for, and the officers, not just the accountancy, but all departments who have worked hard, tirelessly, to bring our proposals forward, and obviously all of what they've been doing in the previous years. It's been a challenge year on year. We cannot forget our position as the lowest funded authority in Wales by a country mile, some 200 odd pounds less per capita than the average, and nearly 600 pounds less than the highest funded authority. Yet we strive to maintain locally accessible services, prioritising education, prioritising social services, those most vulnerable, and doing all we can to keep stimulating growth and jobs and economic activity, as well as trying to do other things like our new social justice portfolio, and pulling those things to the fore. Can I just check that obviously this is our draft report, which will be going out to consultation, and some of the amendments that you've already made to our own report, they will be amended in here, so this report goes out amended. So the removal of the proposal over charging for the childcare element for this year is removed, and also the proposal of charging for blue badges is also out, and the amendment of 4.95 for a planning assumption for next year is included, and then the appropriate workings altered to reflect those changes. That's helpful. So thank you for that. I think those were some positive. There are positive moves. So thank Phil for his work on that. There are other areas in here which I'm sure all members are still anxious about, and we look forward to a healthy debate within Select Committee and receiving back the views from those Select Committees and other stakeholders who will be involved in this, so that we can actually make an informed final decision on recommendations put to Council in March, is it, or whenever we set the council tax anyway. Yes, yeah. I just want to also re-emphasise our view on schools' budgets. We're very mindful of the pressure schools are under all over Wales, but obviously very mindful of our own. And you know, whilst we are receiving a 1% cash cut from Wales government, which is a significant real terms cut, 3%, even though Wales government themselves have a cash increase each year. We do want to try and maintain the support for schools, and we don't want to see that base figure undermined any further. So we have said that we will fund the cost of those staff increases, pay increases, if they come, and we know there are possibly additional ones. We're not sure. We hope they come with funding. It looks like they might do. We'll get to understand what the budget says and what the Wales government might do with any consequential which flow through. But it's really important to us that that school position is maintained and mustn't be any worse than it was last year. So we welcome that. I think there are many other positive things that are still also happening, which we haven't drawn attention to, but it plays into that picture what a proactive council this is in trying to manage and do so many things with such a limited resource. So I'm going to stop there at the moment and open it up to colleagues. I'm sure you'll have areas you want to touch on as well. So Bob.
Well, you've done it again. You've said a lot of what I was going to say, but I just wanted,
like a leader now. So
I know exactly. I just wanted to say that it was really with quite a heavy heart that we decided that the 4.95% council tax should be recommended at this stage. We know the pressure that our council taxpayers are under, but with the pressures that this council faces to deliver its priorities, we recognise that unless we get any other funding from this consequential 1.2 billion, which has been announced by the Chancellor to come into Wales today, unless we get a substantial amount of money from that, anything other than 4.95% is simply not going to be possible moving forward. So I'm just thinking about it. I do think that we need to keep pressure on the Welsh Government going forward to make sure that they do not simply swallow up this 1.2 billion and put it elsewhere, but that we as local authorities, and Monmouthshire particularly as the lowest funded, should have some of that money coming forward as a consequential. And I would hope, Leader, that probably you would be in touch with the Welsh Government and take those views forward. And perhaps it would be worthwhile if we ask Councillor Petruni and the other leaders to join with you in a letter to move forward, putting our point of view and asking for that further funding coming forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when we have our WLJ finance meetings, there is a unity of voice in the challenge for local authorities. However, the voice, sadly, the voice of rural authorities is still not heard well enough. The cost of delivering services in an authority like ours still isn't recognised in the formula appropriately. Whilst there is an element of sparsity came in last year, and this year's an element come in there, we're still finding, we've got a cut of 1%, and we're expecting a 1.5 cut next year again. And what's a galling thing is that we know that Wales Government have a significant lump of reserves unallocated, some 300 plus million pounds made up of some revenue and capital, which is being held. Now, it wouldn't have cost the Wales Government a great deal, a few million, to at least put all local authorities on the same footing. Even if we have our disparities between the amount per capita, at least we could have been saved from the same, we've had the same level of cut. They haven't chosen to do that, but we still need to make that case consistently. Colleagues, Richard?
Yeah, I must say I'm very, very pleased that this budget recognises the challenges that we've got in school budgets. Although on the other side of the coin, I recognise that there are significant implications for the rest of the authority of protecting schools from that 1% cut, particularly as education makes up such a high proportion of the council's expenditure. But I'm very pleased we're protecting schools from that 1% reduction. I'm also very pleased that we're able to meet the pay award. I think that will certainly be appreciated by all the staff who work in our schools. And I must pay tribute as well to everyone who works in our schools for the work they've done in managing those financial challenges over the past couple of years. We're still seeing standards rising, and I think this budget recognises that there are challenges in our schools, and I hope that I can see we're doing everything we can to try and support them in managing those and continue the drive to raise standards even further.
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and I absolutely agree with all that. Sarah, anything you want to raise?
No, just that I look forward to the consultation period, so that's key for me. I don't want to preempt what's going to come out of that, and I think this thorough engagement over the 2-month period is going to be critical in listening to what comes out of the scrutiny sessions.
Yeah, okay. Any other Cabinet members?
Well, perhaps in scrutiny, the Welsh Government might come up with the answers to what they're going to do with this £300 million plus.
Yeah.
And I, from my point of view, I'm just interested about social services. I haven't actually heard anything about the budget this morning because I've been elsewhere, but I am interested in the problems associated with social services and whether it's recognised fully in the budget. But also from a local point of view, I think we ought to recognise all the work done by adult services in Monmouthshire for the savings that they've been able to make, and to recognise the difficulties that children's services have, which is ongoing. So it will be interesting to see what the Welsh Government will make of that as it affects all local authorities.
Yeah. Okay, Dimitri, thank you for your questions. Your floor is yours.
Thank you, Leader. And I want to save the debate. I will leave that for council. I haven't got the will. But I have a couple of questions. One is, I think, a typo on 3.34. The final sentence, I think it says, however, growth in properties is presumed to achieve an extra £530 per income. Is that meant to be 530k?
3.34, you say?
3.34 council tax. Yeah. Is that meant to be K, or are we just expecting 500 quid a year? I assume it's a typo.
It is. It's got to be.
I hope it is. Okay, good. Just so we're clear on that.
If it isn't, Dimitri, I'm seriously worried.
No, I was just pausing because that's made up of two elements. There's 430 in relation to the council tax base and 100 in relation to CTRS savings. So yes, it's 530k.
It is okay. Yeah, so it is a K.
Okay, so the CTRS are brilliant. So on that, one of the questions is about that calculation, and now you've explained a little bit of it. So the CTRS savings from Welsh Government funding to top it us up, presumably, from the losses of the cuts from Westminster.
So the CTRS saving is a recognition that that budget is drawn on to the extent that it's provisioned. So it's a realignment of the budget that provides £100,000 worth of headroom in the budget.
Right, okay. And the growth in houses, last year we underestimated, and I was told by Joy that's because we always got a small c conservative on that. So is that another small c conservative estimate?
I'd rather not use words like conservative, small c, or otherwise I'd prefer to use the word prudent in terms of the level of houses you presume in a year. I mean, we do an assessment based on looking at the LDP, pragmatic consideration and activity within the sector.
Yeah. Because it says we've modelled it, and I was just wondering.
On that basis. And
yeah.
Then what we also do is, you'll appreciate that that what we do is try to convert those properties to Band D equivalent and apply a Band D rate.
Right.
So the properties going up or potentially growing up next year will be in different bands.
Cool.
It says that, well, if these are big properties, what effect is that in terms of the equivalent Band D property? What's the Band D rate? And that gives you the uplift.
Okay, so that's why the variation. Yeah. Okay.
And if you want to put a figure on that, the Band D equivalent of the anticipated new growth is 300.
That's interesting. Okay, thanks. So the report in front of me, and now your additional comments. One I wanted to ask was council tax increase, as I told the leader. So in this report we expected a gap of 482k. But with your announcement that we're budgeting for a 4.95% increase in council tax rather than a 3.9%, does that mean we have no longer any gap?
No, for every 1% increase in council tax, as a rough rule of thumb, 1% increase in council tax net of the potential effect on CTRS is about £500,000 a year.
Yeah, okay,
So-
would that wouldn't wipe out the gap then?
Well, no, because we're modelling 3.95% next year. If we model 4.95%, what would be the effect is about £460,000.
So we're 20k gap.
Yeah,
But-
that presumes that there are no savings
Of course,
through the
of course.
process, and obviously the budget is quite iterative in nature. One of the considerations, and is key to that consideration, is around month 7 and the potential for looking at savings targets that we previously presumed, etc. So there are a number of moving parts, not least of which being Select's feedback to Cabinet around the budget
Yeah.
savings that have been proposed at the moment. So
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that, but one of my questions was going to be about council tax and covering.
There's a couple of
I just gave 2 examples now what we won't be proceeding with.
Yeah.
One's 178,000, the other 60,000.
So they've got to be accounted
So,
for.
so
Yeah,
the
yeah.
gap has just increased by them. So we're still working
Still
on,
Yeah.
on a gap. It's getting closer, but we're still working.
Okay, so what do you expect the gap to be, sorry then, with your announcements? Roughly, ballpark, I won't hold you to it.
It seems to change every 5 minutes, but at the moment it would be around 200
something K.
maybe 300,000. But that's if everything
Stays the
stays
same.
as of today. And
I
I'm
appreciate
telling you
that.
now, it's not going to.
No, I appreciate that because the budget was today. I appreciate that. And final question. In the report, it says the assumption of the extra school funding announced by WAG is already within the envelope of the funding received. Yeah, have I got that correct? If I interpret that correctly? Because the Welsh Government did announce more money, but you're saying it's already accounted for within the envelope you've received.
we have never managed to find that explicit increase
Right, no, just so,
within
'cause I can ask,
within the
yeah.
settlement. And actually, 1 or 2 treasurers across South Wales have actually looked to redo that calculation. There's a degree of movement between grants and RSG every year, which actually means that it's not as transparent as you might
No,
like.
I've tried. It's, a lot of grants have moved into the RSG
Yeah.
and I can't break it down.
And actually, one of the challenges in terms of being able to put a position that I'm certain of, even now, the position from Welsh Government is still a movable feast, because, for instance, it would be nice in October with the provisional settlement to understand all the grants, all the RSG, and be able to give you certainty. Some of those grants even now haven't been reported in terms of what's going to happen to them next year. One that I'm particularly nervous around is around post-16 funding, which is obviously quite significant.
transport?
No,
Just
for
generally.
post-16 funding.
Rich, can I bring Richard in? 'Cause there's some other dynamics within that whole package we need to sort of understand.
Yeah, initially many of us were very pleased to see that headline of an extra, I think it was £62 million that the Welsh Government was announcing to go into schools.
Well, how much did one to expect? 1 point something, was it?
Well, I mean, given the historic underfunding of the county, we were certainly hopeful of getting a share of that 62 million to go into schools. So last week I was at the conference of the 22 cabinet members for education across Wales, and we had the chance to put some questions to the cabinet secretary. So I asked her some questions about the money in the revenue support grant, and also the cuts to the education improvement grant and the relationship between the two. Because of course it's we know that the education improvement grant is going to be cut by £14 million next year, and I have to say our head teachers were very concerned about this when I met with them with officers last week. There's some real, because of course that improvement grant is used for teacher training, for staffing. That would have a real impact on teacher pupil ratios in schools. So I raised these concerns, and I was told that some months ago the Welsh Government were looking at a very deep cut in the revenue support grant. So from their point of view, they wanted to try and mitigate the impact on councils, and they decided to do that by cutting a number of grants. Now, one of these is the education improvement grant. So a number of grants that they've cut. So the education improvement grant usually goes through the EAS to our schools.
Yeah.
So now that has been cut, so less money for our schools, because that money has now gone into the revenue support grant, which in itself has been cut by 1% for Monmouthshire. So in effect, you've got hypothecated funding for schools that has been cut to be put into non-hypothecated funding for councils, much of which would go to schools. So actually we're seeing the worst of both worlds, because both pots are being cut. So there isn't actually any new money at all. And the Cabinet Secretary admitted that the way the Welsh Government had presented this could have been more transparent, which I think is putting it lightly. So there are real concerns about what the impact of these cuts to the Education Improvement Grant will be. I hope that they will, the Welsh Government will consider reversing those cuts, particularly in the light of the £1.2 billion they're getting today. So
that's
as
the
I
one
say,
that we're not expecting anything then of the additional funding announced. Is that what you're saying?
But there's no new
Just
money.
so
There's no new money.
Okay.
So as we've heard today, £1.2 billion. I'm hopeful that some of that will flow down to local authorities, and we can offer schools an even better deal, perhaps. I don't know, but I'm very pleased with the offer that we're putting forward. I think it's the best we can offer schools within the very difficult situation in which we find ourselves with a 1% cash cut. But of course, the impact of these further education improvement grant cuts, I think those cuts are really worrying.
So what we're saying is, so on one hand they're saying 62 million quid is going extra into education. However, what they've done to fund that is cut a lot of educationally supported educational grants. Then they've taken that to create the picture of new money coming into education. That's just smoke and mirrors.
They're not all education grants, but
some of them.
Absolutely, some of them are. Yeah.
And the reality of that, the knock on to that, is that the EAS could feel severely, will be severely disadvantaged, and may end up having to come back to ADOR wanting more money of us to backfill what Wales Government have cut from them.
Yeah,
that's the reality.
Austerity sucks, doesn't it? I mean,
it's not austerity. This is Wales Government's. This is their gift. They can't have devolution and then not be answerable for it. They got it. Yeah, they got the reserves. They've got a consequential flowing through now. You know, massive
money. That'd be nice.
The money's there.
Sorry.
Paul Matthews, Chief Executive. If I may just offer a very straightforward technical answer, and then I'll retreat again to let you continue the conversation as you see fit. There is just a hard reality, which is your funding, Monmouthshire County Council's funding, has dropped by 1% in cash terms for next year.
Yeah.
And just for sake of completion, for this stand for the conversation, the Education Improvement Grant has dropped by £14 million for Wales. Both of those two positions are the factual positions. I think I described it when this news first broke by nothing more sophisticated than a tweet, that it's like playing a game where you put a P under several cups and then you try and find the P. What made this game a little bit harder was there was no P. So it's just a -1% cut, cash. That's not real terms, that's cash. So in real terms, the cut for us is bigger in 18-19. And unless something significant changes, our schools can expect to see somewhere in the order of £350,000 to £450,000 less in education improvement grant next year than they are experiencing this year. That's the technical reality that we are confronting.
Yeah, big challenges. Thank you, Dimitri. Thanks. We're obviously going to play out. We'll have a bigger debate, no doubt, in times. Obviously, you heard the messages about bringing alternative budgets forward by the 1st January. I know you've got some. I know you've already got some in the pipeline.
Just nick them next year.
Let's have them out sooner than later so we can work on them with you, Roger. Your colleague Roger often asks me to open that arm of friendship and for you to bring your points in early. So please let's do that. Let's work together because we're all in this together. So if you can bring those forward before that time, we can help work on them, or at least you can help us explain to us how you're going to fund some of those things. That would be really helpful for us.
Can I just build on that a little bit, Leader, just to pick up on Dimitri's last comment, which I understand completely. But we have always said that 31st of January deadline is for inclusion in this year's budget. if somebody brings us forward some idea which has got legs, we are quite happy to include it in the next year's budget. But it's using the feedback from the consultations as positively as we can. So what I'm saying is we're open to anybody's ideas, but if we're to incorporate them in this year's budget, we need them by the 31st of January. And on the basis that we don't get them till March, we can't use them in this budget. We've got to use them in the subsequent budget if they've got legs. That's what I'm saying.
I'm more than happy to, if opposition, other parties come forward with alternatives, I do want to listen to them, and happy to convene a seminar where we can actually explore them out. And add that to some of the whole consultation process, so we can actually understand some of the things ahead of the main debate, so we can talk them through and understand where they're coming from, and then we've got time to do something with them. And if a seminar would help, or a gathering, that would be, we're more than happy to facilitate that. Okay, colleagues, officers, anybody else need to offer anything in at this point? Obviously, you will be at the various selects, and no doubt many of us will be asked to. Mark?
I just get a point of clarification. I mean, I can clearly reflect the Blue Badge breakfast clubs coming out of the select reports, and some of those select reports are due by the end of this week, so expediency means that I need to get them out quicker rather than later. I advocated to the executive to actually have a council tax strategy for the next 4 years. Could I just clarify, does that 4.95% relate to just next year, or?
4.9, I mean, obviously, council tax assumptions at this stage are assumptions. Obviously, with all council tax discussions, we reserve the right to make a final position in March, in light of whatever happens, between now and then. But the 4.95 is for next year, and so it's 4.9. For planning assumptions for the time being is 495, 395, 395, 395. That may change in the future, but that's the immediate position. Okay. Okay, so everybody clear? Right, so I'm going to take us through the recommendations, because there's a fundamental piece in the recommendation as well, which we need to talk to, and that is the we don't need to talk to, but I want to make sure it's covered and understood. Right, we'll work through them slowly. Right, the recommendations are then that the budget assumptions outlined in paragraphs 311 to 316 in the report are agreed and updated during the budget process should better information become available. So that's the rationale for updating what we've just said. And 2.2, the Cabinet acknowledges the draft response to the Welsh Government on the provisional settlement. Thank you, Phil. We didn't talk to that then, but thank you for drafting that, and officers to put that forward. It is strong. I think we could have been even stronger, but I know it's gone. It's gone now, but I think it captures the key issues. The 2.3 then, that the Cabinet approves the consultation period and opportunity to present alternative proposals ends on the 31st of January 2018. 2.4, that the budget process as outlined in paragraphs 3.6 onwards is adopted, including member budget scrutiny and consultation conducted with select committees and consultation with JAG, Schools Budget Forum and other relevant fora, and that the Cabinet approves the release of the draft budget saving proposals for next year for consultation purposes. 2.6, that the Cabinet agrees to continue to work on the areas required to balance the 18-19 budget and medium-term financial plan through wider targeted activities that sit within the remit of future Monmouthshire. And 2.7, that Cabinet agreed to include the future Monmouthshire budget of £200,000 as a base budget consideration for 18-19, given the key role that future Monmouthshire plays in facilitating a more sustainable and financially affordable future for council activities. And the final one, which is a key one, I think, is 2.8, is to consider formal adoption of the foundation living wage as a financial planning assumption rather than the government living wage. And we know the government living wage has just been increased from 750 to 783, I think it is, or 85, something like that. I don't know how that knocks onto the foundation living wage, because obviously the foundation living wage is significantly above that at £8.75 an hour. So the recommendation there, as is written, we formally adopt the foundation living wage as a financial planning assumption rather than the government living wage. For 2018-19, the rates then are £8.75 per hour and £8.40 per hour respectively. This would have potential brought forward costs from 2019-20 pressures of 83,500.
Can I just explain that, Leader?
Yes, please, yeah.
The foundation living wage for next year is proposed at £8.75. The equivalent government living wage is £8.40.
Okay, so what's the government living wage that the Chancellor just announced now? He just said the living wage was going up from £7.50 to £7.83. I wrote it down while I was listening to the speech. So which living wage is he talking about? Because I know the foundation wage is a better one than that. Because he says, yeah,
I think it's probably fair to say, Leader, that there will be aspects of the Chancellor's statements that we're going to need to review.
We will have to understand it, yeah.
Suffice to say that the recommendation that you're considering, how could I describe this? I think it's at the platinum end of living wage, which is where you've collectively, I think, wanted this organisation to be, and indeed it has been for several years. You're just codifying it into your policy position. I think just also before you move the recommendations, I think in discussion I picked up a further one, which was that I think you agree that you would be asking Councillor Murphy to write a second and subsequent letter to Welsh Government, almost as a preemptive into the Chancellor's 1.2 billion, looking to make a case potentially with other group leaders.
I think yes, and thanks for catching that. I think we ought to, as local authorities. I'm sure WLJ will as well, but I think we ought to now put our own another additional response forward. I think we do need to do that. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Can we say something else then too before I just lost that? It could have been very valuable. Probably not. Okay, so the recommendations are before you, as I read out 2.1 to 2.8, and look forward to seeing these things at the select committee. So all in favour of those. Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for the work that's been done and what's going to have to be done going forward. Right, let's move on to the final report, the capital side of things. Phil.
Okay, thanks again, Leader. It's my usual practice with the capital budget to do a short introduction and then leave it to everybody to plough over, because they're always so comprehensively done that the reports always speak for themselves. But the outline proposed to Cabinet and the indicative capital budgets for the 3 years 1920 to 21-22 is included in this report for consultation purposes, and again it will go and do the rounds so everybody can have their opportunity. Cabinet is confirming the capital strategy, which seeks to prioritise our existing future schools programme and other commitments, whilst also continuing to finance a minimum core capital programme, recognising the risks associated with that approach. We're looking to reaffirm the principle that new schemes can only be added to the programme if the business case demonstrates that they are self-financing, or the scheme is deemed a higher priority than current schemes in the programme and therefore displaces it, and reviews capital priorities where appropriate. And as I say, that's been in for a while, but it's something that we've been reaffirming every year. So I think it's very important we don't lose sight of the fact that the capital programme is as heavily committed, if not more heavily committed than everything else. Cabinet agrees to maximise the use of capital receipts when received to fund the capital programme, therefore reducing the need to borrow, and agrees that the sale of assets in accordance with the asset management plan, and identified it in the exempt background paper that is included within this report for members, is used to support the capital programme, and once agreed, no further options are considered in these assets. But there is one amendment that I'd like to talk about now, and that's last year, if you recall, we had some surplus money within the budget, and we decided that it would be appropriate to put an extra 300,000 into disability facility grants to take away some of the backlog of applications. This has been very successful, but it's clear that further funds are required. Accordingly, we're proposing to put that 300,000 back in again in the coming year. So again, the budget will be 900,000 because in the base it's 600 at the moment. We will then further consult on the adequacy of overall funding. So these, as I said, the report is comprehensive. The only amendment to the capital programme at the moment is that inclusion of that 300,000, but we do have a contingency in there that will support that in any event.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. And absolutely agree. We were in, you know, we were. It wasn't a good figure for the delivery of some of the disabled facilities grants, and I'm hoping that 300,000 closed that gap. Well, I know it has closed that gap a lot, but I think it's absolutely right that we put another 300,000 in there this year and maintain that pace and get those things put in place as fast as possible. I think from a capital programme, I know capital is always a challenge, and I mean, we've still got challenges ongoing at the moment. We've got 2 new schools coming out of the ground. Fantastic facilities. We know Monmouth is making some significant progress, and we know that we've made a commitment to the new school as well in Abergavenny. I know that doesn't affect this capital programme, but we'll have to start thinking about that soon, because I think perhaps you can brief us on what Wales Government have said in regard to that. But you know, there are some positive things. We're still committed to taking the last of the hubs, putting that in place in Abergavenny. That's a fair big commitment to itself. But you know, capital is always going to be really hard to come by. So, but it is, you know, it's important if we want to do the things we want to do and put our money where the mouth is. We've got to continue with our commitment and prioritise what we are prioritising education mainly. So good report. Colleagues, anybody wish to add anything? Was there a briefing on that, King Henry?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of words about that. So we were very pleased last week to hear that the Welsh Government has agreed to match fund our proposals for King Henry VIII school, and we now look forward to taking that to the next stage. We'll have to spend some time now on looking at the detail of these proposals, consulting with teachers, parents, governors, the local community, as we work towards a business case. But yeah, really exciting time, and as you say, our school building programme is still taking shape. I was at Monmouth Comprehensive School the week before last, and as I was there, they were putting the final touches to the steel frame. So that school's really taking shape now. They're now going to be working on putting all the walls and windows in, so it looks it's going to be looking an awful lot more like a school. And I have to say, I pay tribute to the teachers and students who are managing very well, working in such close proximity to a building site. They're managing very well, and I think the contractors and council staff are working very well, communicating with the school to ensure that noise is kept down while noise is eliminated as much as possible while examinations are taking place. There are engineers constantly doing tests on the levels of sound outside when school exams are taking place. So, but they're managing very well, and I pay tribute to them.
Did you say that the temporary accommodation is
temporary structure is up?
So yeah, and just remind us what will that be used for?
So that's going to be used for examinations in the summer, but it can also be used for PE. There are an awful lot of things we can use that temporary structure for. We need to make sure we get best value for money for it, yeah. But that will help take some of the pressure off in ensuring that the school have got all the space they need to fulfil the curriculum this year. Yeah. Before they move into their brand new school in September.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Richard. Thank you. Colleagues, anybody else wish to add anything to say?
I was just going to say it's a good news week for Abergavenny, especially in view of the very difficult financial circumstances that this authority finds itself in.
And, yeah, and Morrison's is coming up
Morrison's,
over ground well.
the hub is on its way. So
Good.
with architects at the moment. So there are lots of things going on in Abergavenny.
Plan is coming together. Dimitri, do you want to add anything on this?
No.
Thank you.
All good.
Okay, so I'll, Phil, I think you've talked us through every recommendation.
I did indeed.
So I'm not going to repeat all that, you'll be pleased to know. I'll move the recommendations then on 2.1 through to 2.5. All in favour of those? Thank you very much. Obviously we've got there's nobody wants to talk on the exempt papers, so I'll have to move this into committee if that was the case, but they're there for information. Okay, there's not a lot on them anyway. Okay, so if that's the case, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Can I thank you very much and look forward to the next December 6th.
The wider connotation, when we had this debate about 2 years ago, circa 2 years ago.